What the? Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome back to my Saturday Hodgepodge, my weekly wrap-up of all things booktube, bookish stuff, book things, anything I want to talk about. I thought I would start off today by doing what I've been doing more at first in these videos, and that's talking about the books I read. So the first book I read that since last week was I read Foster by Keegan, a really short novella about a young girl who spends some time essentially in a home of a couple away from her parents and then is returned to her parents. The setup actually kind of reminded me of Mansfield Park a little bit, but then the story is wildly different. It's set in Ireland, in rural Ireland, and there's really great descriptions of, you know, the Irish countryside and farming practices, little short things about farming and the way in which life worked in Ireland at the time. It's just a really moving, beautiful story. Maybe 55, 60 pages, I can't remember exactly. The writing is just almost perfect, I think, and I really, really liked it. Real fan of Claire Keegan's work now. Also, really like Small Things Like These, which I reviewed a while back last year, I believe. So I read that, and if you get a chance, I was able to find it on my library app, the Libby app. If you get a chance to read it in any way, shape, or form, I would highly encourage you to do that. There is, you know, I do have a fondness, a weakness for Irish writers, and there is something about Claire Keegan's work which reminds me, or kind of resonates with my love of the work of William Trevor. So the second book I read this week was Femme by Magda Carneci, translated from the Romanian by Sean Cotter. This book I saw reviewed by Mark Nash on his channel. I'll leave a link to his channel down below, because in all honesty, his review, I'm sure, is going to be far more coherent and insightful than mine is. This is one of those books that when I finished reading it, my first thought was, I'm not sure I understood all of that, and yet I really liked it, and I really did like it. I don't think I liked it quite as much as Mark did, but I really did like it. So what essentially this is the setup of the story, or I guess the setup of the book, I should say, is that a woman is telling her husband, her lover, her boyfriend, whatever it is, stories. She refers to herself as a tamer Scheherazade, and she's going to tell him these stories to amuse him. And in the process of telling these stories, she essentially tells him how she sees the world, how the world's affected her as a woman, as a person, how she thinks about him, and you slowly get the impression that the relationship that she's in with this man is not going to work out. There is just really gorgeous writing in this. The descriptions of some of the dreams and places and things and the emotions are just really amazing. There are repeated images, mirrors, altars, cathedrals. What else can you think of? Oh, flowers, a park bench that come up over and over again that kind of ground or tie all these kind of thoughts I think that she has together, the evolution of her thinking, about herself as a woman as she matured. I just thought it was really, really good. It's possible to be my top 10 this year, but like I said, I'm not sure that I fully understood all of it. It's not that it's difficult to read, by the way. It's not at all. It's delightful to read, but I'm not sure that I understood all of it. But I really did like it. So those are the two books I finished. Yesterday, I made my way back from my mom's house. I went to visit my mom on Wednesday, and you know, I made that video about my literary white whales on Tuesday. And posted it, and one of those was The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, and so I thought, you know what, I'm going to try listening to it. I've tried reading it, and it's been really difficult for me to read, to get into it, so I thought if I listen to it while I'm driving, that'll be different. And so for about 2 hours on Wednesday, I listened to it, and I got to a place where it just really frustrated me with how little advance in the story there was. To me, the story of these three brothers and their truly awful father, and their relationship with one another and with him, is interesting. And you know, I found that part, particularly Alyosha's character, to be really kind of fascinating. But then you hit this part where for 4 chapters, which works out to more than an hour's worth of listening, the story doesn't go anywhere. It goes off on a tangent, and it's possible that tangent or the direction it goes will be worked back in with the plot later on. But to me, it just felt frustrating because I wanted to get on with the story. I wanted to know more about this family, and all of a sudden we're talking about this religious figure and his interactions with people who are not members of the family necessarily, and that really frustrated me. And then when I was reminded or figured out that the Brothers Karamazov was serialized over a period of more than a year's period of time, my natural kind of suspicions got up that the novel has just been padded out. Even if it all works out, even if he works it all back in, it just felt like a book that had been written to be longer than it needed to be. In addition to that, I didn't care for Dostoevsky's style here with the constant kind of digressions into talking about people or places or little asides. I didn't care for that. I'm sure lots of people do, but that wasn't for me. So I DNF'd the Brothers Karamazov once again. This time, several hours into listening to it, and I started listening to just to try to find a Russian writer that I like and can be my go-to Russian, I guess. I started listening to Fathers and Sons by Turgenev, and for the most part, I like that. And I will tell you that one of the things that I find a little trying about 19th century literature is, and this is true for 19th century French literature too, is that there just seems to be a type of story. There seems to be, a family, and this thing goes wrong in Russian stories, whereas in French stories it's a young man moves to Paris and these things go wrong kind of things. So it felt really, Fathers and Sons feels like other Russian novels that I've read, just focused on relationships between fathers and sons so far. But I am enjoying that more. It is moving at a better pace than the Brothers Karamazov, so I do hope to finish that sometime relatively soon. Anyway, there you go. There is my reading for this week. I'm sure if you live in the United States of America, you have been paying attention to the efforts to ban books and censorship of ideas and censorship of books published by LGBTQ plus people and about the LGBTQ plus experience being banned from schools and places like that. And Florida being kind of the epicenter for everything awful, I think, in politics in the United States of America, which is saying a lot considering I live in Texas, which is, pretty close to the epicenter of everything awful. This week we learned that Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem had been banned from a local or from a school book library, or had been moved to an age-restricted section where it's unlikely to be checked out or read by anybody. And the only objection was raised by one parent who thought it was divisive. And the irony of that is that there is nothing divisive about that poem. As a matter of fact, the poem was written to be a uniting poem, and it certainly is. And this thing brought up, the thing that I think that we are overlooking, we're not seeing the forest for the trees and what's going on, and that is that we have one political ideology in the United States of America that is emphasizing individualism and individual rights at the expense of our ability to function as a society. It should not be within the power of a single parent to ban any book from a school library. There should be more than that. I mean, this one parent is denying literally hundreds of kids the opportunity of being able to read this book and absorb these ideas, and for no real reason other than, I suspect, racism. That is taking individual power and rights too far. This parent's right to not have her kids exposed to things she doesn't want to doesn't supersede everyone else's right, everyone else's collective rights to have that material available, to have their kids, be exposed to different ideas. Just because one parent doesn't want it doesn't mean it shouldn't take place. And we see this a lot at these school board meetings where, to be honest with you, the parents who now go to these school board meetings are just grandstanding. They're just looking for their few minutes of fame on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or something like that. And they're just, really behaving badly in ways that I find to be shocking. My favorite are the ones where parent will go to the school board with a book that they find objectionable, and they will read the objectionable passages out loud at the school board meeting. The things they don't want kids to hear, they will read out loud, even though there are kids in the room, at the school board meeting room, where they're reading those books. This is like, these are people who are not trying to protect kids. These people are grandstanding. They're looking for their moment of power and fame. And I think that in lots of ways our social media culture just really feeds into that. The only thing worse than a parent doing it is when they have their child read the objectionable information in front of the school board. And, you know, so that they clearly marked out the dirty bits in the book and then had their child practice reading the things they don't want their child to read, so their child can read the things they don't want their child to read in public, in front of other children. There's nothing about protecting kids in that. Now, you know, there are issues to be discussed and resolutions to be, you know, come to collectively, but this is not a situation in which an individual person's taste or offensive or you know, sense of propriety should make rules for everybody else. And that is what we're seeing, whether we're talking about that being what we're seeing in terms of books or anything else in the United States of America. We see one party elevating individual rights to the extent that we cannot have a society. You know, we live in a country which was created on the concept of relative rights. You have the right to do things that you want to do until they interfere with me. And we have a government which is created collectively and elected collectively, which is given powers by the people to resolve where these issues come into conflict. And oftentimes I think we see one party abandoning the idea of compromise and going with a position of absolutism. Anyway, there are my thoughts about that and censorship. And since I was thinking about censorship, I was also thinking about profanity. My wife and I have been watching new, I think it's on, I can't remember what streaming service is on. It's called Shrinks or Shrinkage or something like that. Shrinking, that's what it's called, which involves these three psychologists, counselors, and their kind of life problems and adventures. And one of the things I noticed is that there's a lot of profanity in that. Now, that brought up the question that I have, and I'm not sure anybody feel comfortable answering this, but, you know, being raised in a more than fundamentalist Christian household, profanity was not something that we heard all the time, even though my mom did have a favorite curse word, which we did hear from time to time, which started with an S and ended with a T. But profanity was not something that was tolerated out loud in my home. And so, you know, when my kids were growing up, I just kind of naturally stopped using profanity so that I didn't use it in front of them. And as a teacher, I kind of stopped using profanity. I kind of trained myself not to say profane words. But in this TV series, there's a whole lot of cussing from every age group you can imagine, saying all the words, essentially. And it doesn't offend me, and I'm not shocked, but it just kind of brought up the idea of which one is more normal? A family in which, you know, profanity is used regularly and openly by all the family members, or a family in which profanity is almost never used, or is it somewhere in the middle where the parents can cuss but they don't let the kids cuss or whatever? Anyway, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts about that. Not as a moral judgment. I'm not judging you if you're, you know, somebody uses profanity. I do too. But just kind of interesting where those ideas or where that comes from, and you know, what is kind of the norm on that. Anyway, just random thought here at the end of my Saturday Hodgepodge. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.